Hey everyone, Gigi here with Spirit Readings, and I'm so glad that you can join me here today. This is going to be the second segment of our Witchy Wednesday. We're looking at the Element Encyclopedia of 5,000 spells, and if you followed last week, I'll try to link last week's in the description below. I decided to go through a little history lesson, discuss some things before we just dive right into the spells, because there's power in knowledge, you guys, and, we want to be aware of what we're doing, right? So today we're going to go through where do magic spells come from, okay? So according to the author, folklorist, and a scholar of magic, Zora Neale Hurston, magic is older than writing, so nobody knows how it started. My goodness, wow, okay, so very true, but what we do know is that magic comes from all over the globe. There is not a people or culture on earth that did not at one time possess a magical tradition, whether they recall it today or whether or not they still use it. Some cultures and religions revel in their magical traditions. Others are ashamed of them or deny that the traditions ever existed. Some ethnic groups like to point the finger and suggest that magic comes from other people, not them. Oh no, never. Any practices of their own are only isolated bad habits picked up from disreputable magical wanderers or neighbors. When a large cache of papyri from Alexandria in Egypt was found to be largely devoted to magic spells, anthropologists, Egyptologists, and other scholars exulted. Not because they were necessarily so interested in magic, although some were, but because magic spells reveal a tremendous amount about a culture and its circumstances. Read between the lines of a spell and you will discover important details about people's expectations of life and death, their daily problems, the materials that they cherish, their spiritual outlooks. For example, recently published books intended for the urban magical practitioner attempt to minimize or even eliminate the need for botanicals. Beyond their value to their intended audience, these books also transmit a crucial message to all of us regarding the state of our environment. As another example, only cultures that possess a belief in the possibility of legal justice, however remote, produce court case spells. Love spells reveal cultural sexual dynamics, so you see magic spells have tremendous value as history, anthropology, and sociology, way beyond their practical value to the spell caster. Translations of these Alexandrian papyri, now known as the magical papyri, were eagerly awaited, stemming mainly from the 2nd century BCE to the 5th century CE. They span a crucial, fascinating period of history, the times of Cleopatra, Jesus, the rise of Rome, the fall of Jerusalem, and the emergence of Christianity as a cohesive faith and world power. So, gonna take a little moment here. I am someone, I've always felt very drawn to Egypt, you guys, and as I've gone along on my journey in visiting past lives, as they come or as I'm led, I have discovered myself in Egypt many times, and ooh, it's a trip, you guys. So if you ever feel very drawn to a specific place or a specific time, Pay attention to that. For some reason, Spirit really laid that on me to say right there. Alexandria, although it became Egypt's capital, is not an ancient pharaonic city. It was founded by the Macedonian conqueror Alexander the Great. One of several cities he named is in his own honor. Its orientation is the Mediterranean, not the Nile, like other older Egyptian cities. At various periods, indigenous Egyptians were not even permitted to live within Alexandria's boundaries. It was a Greek outpost in Egypt, with Greeks as the elite citizenry. Cleopatra, descendant of one of Alexander the Great's generals, and the last of her dynasty, was the only one of her lineage who troubled to learn the Egyptian language. The city achieved a reputation as a world capital of magic. Alexandria supported a sizable population of magic practitioners of all kinds, diviners, dream interpreters, professional spellcasters, all presumably serving the needs of their specific communities rather than Alexandria as a whole, because Alexandria was a rigidly divided city. Although Alexandria, like many cities of its time, was divided into quarters, true divisions, like many a modern city, were cast along ethnic lines. Two of Alexandria's quarters were Greek, one was Egyptian, the only area in which they were permitted to reside, and the fourth housed a sizable Jewish community. And I am going to take a drink of my tea real quick. I have to wet my whistle. Now, divisions between the quarters were distinct, reflecting hostility between these communities, which periodically bubbled over into rioting and violence. Nothing new under the sun, you guys. It was a turbulent, volatile city, demonstrating ethnic tensions only too familiar today. This may be ancient history, but it's a familiar landscape to many contemporary urban dwellers or anyone who reads a current newspaper. Wow. It was precisely the city's divisions and its multi-ethnic population and varied religious and spiritual traditions. Alexandria was also the birthplace of Gnosticism that so excited the archaeologists and scholars, it provided the potential for something like historical control groups. Expectation was that the orientation of the papyri would be largely Greek. In Athens, there was a tendency to associate magic with out-of-towners, Thracians or Thessalonians. Would this practice continue? Would there be completely Greek magic, or would the Alexandrians transfer the outsider role to the native Egyptians? Would the Greeks, traditionally impressed by Egyptian mysticism, I'm probably going to butcher this, Pythagoras studied in Egypt, adopt some of their host countries' practices? Would it be possible to clearly trace the emergence of Gnosticism as well as pagan reactions to Christianity? Answers to these crucial questions were anticipated with bated breath as translation of the papyri progressed. What was uncovered is a mess. The spells on the whole are neither clearly nor even mostly Greek or Egyptian or that third ethnic group, Judaic, but a scrambled jumble of all three, with a healthy dose of pagan and Christian Gnosticism together with a sprinkling of influences from other parts of the Greek and Roman empires. Any individual spell may incorporate the God of Israel, assorted angels, Egyptian gods, Mesopotamian gods, Greek gods, Nubian gods, Jesus Christ, and Christian spirituality, botanical magic, divination, names of mysterious things we have no way of presently identifying, some or all of the above, and definitely not necessarily in that order. So my goodness, that does sound like a mess there. So What was a poor scholar to do? How to interpret and sort this material, determine who wrote it, and to whom it truly belongs and applies. None of the information in the papyri is mundane, everyday material that you might say any individual on the street was bound to know. The spells and incantations are the height of occult knowledge. The magical papyri are the descendants of highly guarded spiritual secrets, the ancestors of high ritual magic. Alexandria was an intensely urban community. These spells don't reflect the knowledge common to any village, wise woman, or cunning man, but are highly detailed and specialized occult in every sense, the stuff of initiates and adepts. So who wrote them? The information contained in them defies all attempts to pigeonhole these spells. They derive from over centuries and so can't be attributed to one person. Not even the legendary Hermes Trismegistus. Nothing in Alexandria's history indicates a mingling of cultures that would provide a general intercultural exchange like this. Quite the opposite. Furthermore, although Greek was Alexandria's lingua franca, and many Jews, for instance, spoke that language rather than their own, spiritual secrets were still recorded in each community's distinct tongue. Sacred, secret, spiritual texts in each possible tradition were maintained in the most obscure version possible, specifically so that profane eyes could not access them. Egyptian, Greek, and Hebrew aren't even written with the same alphabet. Who had access to all this vast information? How was it transmitted? Intense debate ensued regarding who compiled these spells and who actually cast them. Were they Greeks, as had originally been anticipated, or were they Egyptians? Were they Greeks gone native? Controlled attempts have been made to combine aspects of Greek and Egyptian religion, culminating in the cult of Serapis. But then, why the Jewish references? Were they Egyptians striving to Hellenize? But then, why the Christian references? Maybe the spells were compiled by unemployed wizard priests trying to find a new professional niche market. But then, why don't they have more faithfully to hew more faithfully to centuries of conservative Egyptian tradition? They couldn't be Jews because, of course, Jews are monotheistic and don't participate in this kind of thing. But then if not, how did the spellcasters learn all those obscure Hebrew names of power, names extremely difficult to access even within the Jewish community? But if they were Jews, what were they doing invoking Hecate, Hathor, and Hermes? They couldn't be Christians because Christians forbade magic in general, because Alexandria was home to a particularly militant branch of Christianity, and because the rift between Christian and pagans was especially violent and bitter in Alexandria. But if they were not Christians, why all the references to Jesus Christ? These mysteries were not the ones that scholars had so eagerly anticipated investigating and debating. Translation of the magical papyri occurred only recently. Perhaps more information will be uncovered. Volume 1 of the Greek magical papyri in translation, including the demotic spells, was first published in 1986. Egyptologists, anthropologists, historians, linguists, and other scholars continue to discuss their origin and broad scope. The only experts, I suspect, who have not been consulted are contemporary urban magical practitioners for whom the entangled ethnic and spiritual roots of the magical papyri spells would come as no surprise. Might have to get back to the basics, get to the roots where this came from. When historians counted Alexandria's 4 quarters, they neglected a 5th community who quite obviously rejected, transcended, and ignored those boundaries. Alexandria's vast community of magical practitioners, a quarter unto themselves, Where other residents of Alexandria found divisions, these magical practitioners discovered a crossroads. Magic thrives where roads meet. What the magical papyri manifests is the birth of modern magic. If you were an up-and-coming metaphysical seeker or magical practitioner back then, Alexandria was the place to go. Why? Not just to make money, you retain more of a monopoly by staying home as a big fish in a small pond. No, you'd go to Alexandria to meet other practitioners, learn what they had to teach, and share some secrets of your own. Love that. That is beautiful. The spells of the magical papyri demonstrate what happens at those crossroads. Where others obeyed the rules and kept to their own kind, magical practitioners went wandering with magic as the lingua franca, the common tongue, exploring each other's secrets, deconstructing them, and putting them back together in whole new confabulations. This mixing is not necessarily about improvement. Spells that hew faithfully to one tradition work just as powerfully as blended spells. Instead, it's about experimentation and the desire, common to all practitioners, to adapt something of power to one's own needs. This process is not always a happy one. One person's sharing is another person's appropriation. The Egyptians, for example, were appalled when they learned that Greeks had discovered aphrodisiac properties in their sacred temple incense, kyphi. And I'm probably not saying that right. It's Kyphi. That's probably something I will look up later. Alexandria presaged the modern city, filled with immigrants from Earth's different corners. Previously, opportunities to meet other practitioners were limited. Nearby practitioners probably came from your own family. Everyone shared the same knowledge and repertoire of tools and materials. Sure, there was the occasional wandering stranger, but nothing like the vast landscape of Alexandria, where practitioners from so many traditions could sit and share secrets. Magic back then, as it does today, transcends and defies boundaries of language, ethnicity, race, gender, or religion to form its own community. When I first read the magical papyri, my immediate reaction was recognition. All those mixed up boundary jumping spells resembled in nature, if not in specific detail, the culturally diverse magic that I learned in my own hometown. That crossroads of the modern world, New York City. New York, like Alexandria, has had its moments of tense ethnic division, but you wouldn't know it from the metaphysical community. Fearing the law, fearing ridicule, people may hold themselves aloof, at least until genuine magical credentials, knowledge, respect, and curiosity are demonstrated, but then the walls come down. One thing magical practitioners have in common all around the world is curiosity, the quest for knowledge. We are the original inquiring minds who wish to know. Obstacles to knowledge are bitterly resented and are persistently undermined. What? I don't know what I'm saying, you guys. Magicians always wish to expand their power and increase their knowledge and repertoire. There is a reason that so many of the earliest books printed were grimoires or books of magic. The same reason that Lord Thoth is patron both of scribes and magicians. Providing that a society is at all literate, magical practitioners on the whole are great readers, from ancient Egypt's House of Life to the voodoo queens of New Orleans. There's only one thing better than learning from a book, and that's learning from each other. Magical practitioners are in general an open-minded bunch. Put a few in a room together and fairly quickly tools will be compared, secrets shared, and demands for knowledge made. I feel at one point I was a gypsy, you guys. Like, I have felt that so strongly, you know, going from place to place and living and dying by highway dust, blowing along like a tumbleweed. Spells are constantly evolving to suit changing needs. This is particularly true where cultures live closely alongside each other. Nothing crosses borders faster than a magic spell. For instance, it can be almost impossible to separate totally the intermingled strands of various European magical traditions. Because certain methods, materials, and styles are more popular and prevalent in one area than another, doesn't necessarily mean that they originated there, or at least not in isolation. Even the most sedentary, isolated communities received periodic magical cross-pollination from Jews, Romani, tinkers, and assorted wanderers. These entwined traditions become even more complex in the magical and spiritual traditions of America and the Western Hemisphere. During the height of the African slave trade, people were kidnapped from all over Africa. What were originally distinct cultures, each with specific spiritual and magical traditions, found themselves thrown together in dire circumstances. The type of circumstances in which many reach for magic. In Haiti, the traditions of the Fon people of Dahomey were dominant and evolved into Vodun, although not in isolation. These traditions evolved, adding components of indigenous Taino magic, Taino, diverse other African traditions, French and Spanish magic, thus also transmitting Basque, Jewish, Moorish, and Romani influences, and last but not least, Freemasonry. You think this is beginning to make Alexandria look simple? Just wait. Following later political turbulence, many Haitian refugees fled to New Orleans, where Vodun evolved once more, retaining its frame but picking up new influences, this time from the local black population, whose own magic derived from Congolese sources rather than Fon, and also British, Italian, and Native American magical traditions. New Orleans, the Crescent City, became known as the capital of American magic. Its traditions would soon be incorporated into what might be called mainstream magic, that magic most accessible to the population at large. This magic would eventually be transmitted to Europe, where, who knows, maybe it's now been picked up by African immigrants to evolve and transform once more. After extended contact, New Orleans voodoo can be hard to distinguish from hoodoo. Hoodoo's basic framework also derives from Africa, mainly from Congolese traditions, but again, not in isolation. Deprived of the botanicals with which they have been familiar in Africa, their materia magica enslaved African magical practitioners consulted with Native Americans and acquired a whole new botanical tradition, sharing magical and spiritual secrets as well. These hoodoo doctors typify the proverbial questing, intellectually curious magician. In addition to Native Americans' West and Central African roots, their tradition soon incorporated European folk magic, the Egyptian mysteries, Freemasonry, and Kabbalah. The Great Grimoires became available to all. Transmission was cross-cultural. With the exception of a very few isolated mountain pockets, American magic in general demonstrates tremendous African influence. Further north, powwow is the magic of German immigrants to Pennsylvania. The Pennsylvania Dutch, a corruption of Deutsch. Ooh, some of this is tongue twisting, you guys. The basic framework is, of course, the German magic the migrants carried with them, both high ritual and folk magic, which incorporated a healthy dose of Jewish and Romani influence as well as those of neighboring European people. In America, strong further influence in the tradition's name came from Native Americans, especially the Iroquois, and from the Chickeners, the so-called Black Dutch, Romani Ziguaners? I'm not sure. Forcibly deported from Europe, who, separated from clan and family, found discreet safety among the powwow artists. Oh my goodness, I love powwows. In 1819 or 1920, or oh my goodness, in 1819 or 1820, dates vary, powwow artist and Hexenmeister John George Holman compiled a canon of powwow wisdom and published it under the title The Book of Powwows, The Long Lost Friend. This book, still in print, traveled to the cities of the South, carried largely by Jewish merchants who sold it to voodoo and hoodoo practitioners who incorporated it into their already multicultural blend of magic, and no doubt sent some equally valuable information up north with the returning merchants who were learning from everybody and spreading the news. There is an important exception to this magic melting pot, of course. Very isolated areas, places where people have historically had little or no contact with others, maintain extremely pristine ancient magical traditions. Like the unique creatures of the Galapagos Islands, their traditions developed in isolation and thus may have very unique, easily identifiable characteristics. It's much easier to identify a spell from Papua New Guinea, for instance, than it is to distinguish between French, German, or Swiss spells. Because these traditions are so unique and because one can identify the spell's origins, it's very tempting to constantly point out which spell came from which isolated culture. The danger is that this creates a lopsided effect, akin to those old school anthropologists who were so quick to note the curious habits of the natives while failing to remark on similar practices, parallels, and traditions back home. I can't emphasize more that every distinct people, every culture, every nation, every religion and spiritual tradition has at one time or another incorporated, developed, and created magic spells. Each one of us has a magical history somewhere along the line. Loss and abandonment of these traditions tends to accompany loss of culture or religious autonomy. These spells, therefore, are a shared human heritage, not isolated odd things engaged in only by strange other people very different from us. In some cases in this book, I have pointed out where spells come from and which traditions they represent, especially if there's some interesting factoid associated with it, or if that knowledge may help you cast a spell, or sometimes just to give credit where credit is due for a particularly beautiful spell. However, I have not done so in every case. Sometimes I did not wish to keep emphasizing one culture as if they were Earth's only magical ones, especially those cultures whose vast magical repertoire has stimulated others to vilify, stereotype, and persecute them. In other cases, the roots were too tangled to identify their origins honestly. Although many of the spells in this book are meant for use, others are included purely for historic value and perspective, so that we may remember and learn from them. And I think that's beautiful. And I think I'm going to stop there. Next Wednesday, we can pick up with Magic Today. Ooh, that's a lot of reading, you guys. This is a big old book, and I'm really excited to go through it with you guys, to learn the history, to discuss, along the way before we do dive on into the spells, and, that we're showing respect, that we're honoring, the different cultures around the world, showing our love and respect to each and every one, to Gaia herself, and you guys, please leave your comments below, you guys, of what you thought about this segment, and if you're excited to dive more into this. I'm sure a lot of you are looking forward to the actual spell work, and I promise you we will get there. I just really felt led to learn first, and so I'm going with Spirit on this one, and like I said, at some point we will start diving into the spells. Not sure how much further, but we will get there slow and steady, you guys. If you enjoyed this and you're excited to see more, please leave me a comment. Let me know. I do take the time to read through all of the comments and respond and answer any questions that there may be to the best of my ability. If you did enjoy this, please smash the heck out of that like button, that old thumbs up button. Give it the old razzle dazzle pizzazzle there. And please subscribe if you feel it too. I would love and appreciate that so very much, you guys. I love seeing growth. I love seeing expansion. And I love being able to interact with you guys on a daily basis. It really does bring a lot of joy into my life. You guys are a blessing for me, and I want to be a blessing for you in return. And if you do decide to subscribe, make sure you tap that bell icon so you get the ding ding when I upload new content. And please share, because that does help me grow. That does help me get out there. You guys are so wonderful and so amazing, and I love and appreciate each and every single one of you. And from the bottom of my heart, I want to say thank you, blessed be, namaste, and goodbye.